Hello to all you patriots out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 303 of Canadian Patriot Podcast, the number one short shorts podcast in Canada. We're recording on June 28th, 2021. Joining me tonight, we have Gavin, Pierre, other Andrew, and Dave.
And we'd love to hear your feedback about the show. So please visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback or email us at feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. Feel free to tell us how short our shorts should actually be, or that our shorts are the correct length.
We need your help to support Canadian Patriot Podcast. Visit patreon.com/CPP and become a Patreon. You can get a better quality version of the show for just $1 per episode. Show you're not a communist. Buy a CPP t-shirt for just $19.99 plus shipping and theft. Visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com, the homepage, and follow the link on the right.
That brings us to my favorite segment. This is called What Are We Drinking? It's where I ask my co-conspirators for plausible deniability. We'll start with Gavin. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a handful of hard seltzers. There will be more casualties this evening in drinks than there were on the Rhodesian side of the war.
Pierre, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking some cold shots tonight.
Andrew?
I'm drinking one of my own brews, a traditional mead. It's about 11%. Then I'll be following that up with Somersby Red Rhubarb Cider.
Whoa, 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 whoa. We know what happens to you when you drink half a bottle of yours.
Yeah, well, there's only about a third of a bottle because this was the
okay.
the extra
Making sure.
at the end of bottling this weekend.
Looking out for your health, bud.
Someone's about to get belligerent.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Dave, what are you drinking?
Some Coors Light. I'll switch up to the hard stuff as soon as this beer's done, which is going to be very shortly. It's going down way too quickly.
Dave's also looking for a rough tomorrow.
I only got to work tomorrow, and then we're done, baby.
Good stuff. I'm going to be drinking Waterloo Brewing's IPA because I went to the LCBO and I couldn't find any Lion or Castle lager.
Or any Christmas stuff?
No, because
last time.
Lion and Castle would be keeping in with tonight's theme.
Is that better or worse than tea brewed 10 times on the same tea bag?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not eating the tea bag when we're done this.
You know who does eat the tea bag? Trudeau.
That's a different. Anyway, Patriot Challenge: do 5 things every day, be a better person. Russell Finnish Reserve Sport Association, end of July. Section 74 challenges. Send them an email, send them money. That cleans up the housekeeping because we're late starting and we have a big book to get through. Tonight's book is A Handful of Hard Men by Hans Wessels. I don't know about the best book ever, but I mean,
it's top. It's up there. It's like top.
It's
5.
pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read this and I've read the Bible, and I'm making a joke about that. I don't actually think the Bible is a particularly good book, but this is definitely up there for good books.
Yeah, but we're comparing fiction and real life here.
That's
well played, sir. Well played.
Good point. So I'm actually going to just dive in like midway through my copy of the book because it has the line that I wanted for the beginning of the show. This is the middle of 1977. This is prior to Operation Dingo. This was making the best use of specialist soldiers, Robinson recalls. These were classical SAS operations. The aim was to strike in the depth and terrorize the enemy who had no idea as to how we were able to attack them. Always frustrating us in the operational sphere was the perennial shortage of helicopters, which sometimes made rapid deployment of shock troops impossible. When there was no support available, the SAS simply had to finish some jobs themselves. The sum of it was that a handful of hard, dedicated soldiers were making life miserable for Zanla and their Frelimo allies in their very heartland, and at the same time severely curtailing their ability to cross into Rhodesia. A landmass the size of England had been infiltrated by no more than 60 SAS operators at any given time, and they had gunned, mined, and ambushed it into a state of confused disorder. Their aggression created a situation where the enemy had to be ever vigilant and defensive in territory it would have liked to have called home. We got a whole lot of book to get into.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So before I spend all night reading the book, not nearly as well as the guy that does it on Audible, from what I understand. Opening shots from anybody.
I mean, these guys were just unbelievably tough. You know, like you read the book and you hear about all of the crazy things and the hardships that they had to endure in order to protect their homeland from communists, or as they called them, terrorists. And then, you know, they had to suffer all of the indignities of the, you know, the political nonsense in the background and being called racists and all of these things while they're out there, you know, fighting for their lives and doing an incredibly good job with so few resources and winning the war, only to lose to the political solution that basically backfired for everybody. You know, they're not any better off now than they were back then. They're much worse off now as a nation.
For me,
They
I
were
think
worse off like within 10 years of
Yeah.
them losing.
I was gonna say, I think for me, these guys and their story is they're like the modern day Spartans, in my opinion. A few stood
Yeah.
against many, and they came out on top time and
Yeah.
time again.
There were
They should-
even fewer of these
Yeah.
guys than there were Spartans.
Yeah, it shows you what you know, grit, determination, know-how, and you know, working together can you know, you can pretty much overcome pretty much fucking anything.
Yeah. And short shorts.
Yeah.
Always wear short
Of course,
Yeah.
got to keep everything, you know, well ventilated.
I don't think anything down there could have fit in regular pants for these guys with the cojones on them.
shorts. No,
But
yeah.
no, just reading the story, just, you know, like thinking about it, just being like, could you ever think you could put yourself in a scenario like that, or ever think that you would, you know, whether you signed up or not, thinking the scenarios that these guys went through, and like from the book, I mean, they all sounded cheery about a lot of it. Like, you know, came back, had some grub, had some food, and like, oh, you got to go back out, and like back out for like 6 weeks, stink like a donkey, come back, take a shower, have some hot chow, have a night of sleep, and like right back at it. You know, like the determination and the willingness to fight for what is right. You know,
Like
and
hear-
for them is unbelievable.
You hear these incredible stories from, like, you know, World War II and Vietnam, and even like, you know, the Iraq, Afghanistan and all that. And like, not that the people in those things did not achieve great things, because they did. And some of them had some incredible, horrific stories. But these guys seem to be doing it day after day after day after day with like almost no resources. And yeah, doing it all with like that British stiff upper lip and just like, you know, keep calm and carry on kind of an attitude, even though the Brits, you know, gave him the old 2-finger salute and told him to basically fuck off.
Yeah, no, it was an inspiring read to know that people can think that way and commit to stuff like that. Like, it's not an easy ordeal to go through, I'm sure.
And how many times these guys were just basically abandoned because they didn't have the resources to go pick them up, and they're like, well, I guess we've got to walk 100 miles home through the jungle with like wild elephants and tigers and all kinds of other crazy stuff. Oh, and no supply drop for food. We've got to drag a piece of cloth behind us to even be able to pick up water to drink.
Yeah. And 300 guys trying to hunt us down.
Yeah. Well, you know, no big deal.
Let's go through a couple of those things. I got some passages that are picked out, particularly related to what Dave was saying. Not that it's not what you guys were saying too, but what Dave said particularly about a few men doing a couple of really, really difficult things. This is after Opting Go. This is probably about 1979 or so. I'm at the end of the book, or near the end of the book. Years on the Russian front had left an impression on Watt. He had become respectful of free limo tracking teams, and knew how dogged they could be. He also knew that he had stirred the proverbial hornet's nest, and the enemy was going to throw their all into this particular cause. His initial plan was to devote all energy to speed. Careful anti-tracking would have to wait, but the raiding party was still loaded down with mines and mortar bombs in addition to their regular food, water, and equipment. Each man was carrying close to 100 pounds. Fitness and mental toughness was put to the test. Failure would probably prove fatal. The commander warned his men to watch their step. A stumble and a broken ankle or a torn ligament could bring about their death. Fleet of foot and powered by determination to survive and fight another day, they humped their packs, braced for the long haul, and strode into the night as fast as their legs would move them. Virtually non-stop, with heads down and shoulders straining, every now and then an upward glance would reveal the twinkling lights of the Southern Cross on their right. Then the stars disappeared behind the clouds, and the soldiers could only wonder if a benevolent God had taken an interest in their plight. He had. In the early hours of the morning, the wind in their blackened faces blew stronger and cooler, and it was soon followed by lightning bolts lashing the eastern sky to the accompanying sound of booming thunder. It was music to their ears. Then the rain came streaming down, and they smiled as they soaked it up. Quickly, little rivulets formed atop the sand, now mud, and the water that flowed took with it their tracks. They were their calling card to the enemy. Relief had arrived. Without the rain, I'm not sure that we would have made it, recalls Watt. Troops had saturated the area, and we knew the local civilians were looking for us too. There were tanks and other armored vehicles deployed, so if it came to a fight, we weren't in much of a chance. It was pretty eerie hearing them clanking and clunking around us. We walked solidly through the night, virtually without stopping, and when the rain came, I changed direction immediately. The following day and night, and then all the next day, we kept moving as fast as our legs would carry us. It was a race away from almost certain death. Finally, we could go no more. I found a clump of trees close to a bend in a river. If we had to move, we had the option of the river, but we could walk no further. Then we burrowed into the thickest cover we could find and hid as best as we could in a crevasse. They're being chased by an armored battalion through the jungles in Mozambique during this. Just
After absolutely
insane.
fucking up their bases.
I think this is right after an attack on the power plant that was supplying power to Barrera.
Yeah. And like,
Yeah.
That
so
was heavily like being protected by military presence.
yeah, so it's not even that they're operating inside their own country. They're going into the neighboring country where they are not supposed to be and just hammering these guys with, very few troops, very few supplies, and they would have to like parachute in like at night far enough away that they could hike in without being detected to basically, blow up a power plant.
Yeah, and disable another country's entire command and control structure in the process of that with 12 dudes with FNs, or I guess RPDs is likely more accurate, but
And they outran them with 100-pound packs.
well, and that was the piece that I wanted to touch on with what you said, Dave, was like these dudes were in incredibly good shape. And beating after beating, like running through the jumping into another country from a plane that flew in World War II, destroying a power plant, and then running dozens of kilometers through the bush while you're being chased by an armored battalion.
Yeah. Which means that the other guys have vehicles and a bunch of people to make this easier. They're running full tilt through the jungle. Yeah.
Did they ever get caught up to in that? I don't think they did they?
No,
I mean,
they
that
made it out,
no
no casualties as per always.
But I mean, if you read the other book that covers kind of some of the same missions, like there were times when they were caught, but like it always ended in a gunfight where they won and ran away again.
So they didn't get caught; they got more cornered.
Yeah.
Cornered, but they just shot some people in the face, and
Or they found their tracker, then killed the enemy tracker, then put a big hinder on the enemy and trying to find them again. So
Yeah, with their knife so that no one would hear it, which then gave them the ability to sneak away.
yeah.
And then they would see the dead tracker and kind of not know what direction to go in anymore and just start blindly firing. But like, yeah. So yeah, they were certainly caught, but never caught unawares. And even if they were, they still got the upper hand somehow because these guys were just like unreal.
There's superior fire fire support. And
one might even say that they were men amongst men.
Well, I don't know if the SAS would take that, but sure. So I've got one more in the same vein. This is April of '79 in the Matabee Trust tribal trust lands. I guess if I put the words in the right order. This is more from Watt being interviewed. The success of this operation was based on being able to anti-track, and the lessons learned from Jacob and Philman during my early hunting days were invaluable, says Watt. I knew exactly how to shake anyone following us when I needed to, and draw them in when I wanted to kill them. The killing ground was very important and had to be visualized on the move well in advance. I always tried to draw them in over hard ground, which made tracking tough. They would have to cross grain, mingle, and circle the area looking for spoor. I would walk in a buffalo hook pattern, positioning myself on their flank and hit them. I knew the key was to keep moving and keep the gooks guessing. At times, I deliberately left a trail to lead them into compromising positions. On one occasion, I duped them into a position, and we hit them on the flank and extended line. This caused quite a stir as the enemy felt they were being attacked in an area they considered their own. They called in reinforcements from Mozambique, some of who were actually free limo, but we were ready for them and were on their tracks almost as soon as they crossed the border. We simply stayed on their tracks until we caught up with them and killed them. Our bushcraft skills helped us and anticipate their movements and find them. The gooks did not enjoy it at all. This is where a small group of mine did the damage. The enemy thought they were up against a lot of men, but we were never more than 12. But we were aggressive, extremely fit, and possessed shooting skills beyond our training. Frank Turney and Mike Mingay were masters of the machine gun. We were tenacious, enthusiastic, and never gave up. This was not the Vietnam scenario of chopper in, quick patrol, and then chopper out. We ran up to 20 kilometers a day, literally running them out of an area. I was reprimanded for being reckless and told to slow down. But if we were on spoor, that was all that mattered. Other troops were moved out of the area because no one knew what would pop up next. Just how many we killed, I don't know, but there were a lot of bodies.
Stack them high, stack them deep.
Well, I mean, this is what I wanted to get to that Dave touched on at the beginning when we were getting input from people is these guys are incredibly fit. They're very aggressive. So much so to the point where the guy running the show, Daryl Watt, got reprimanded by his senior officers for being too aggressive, amongst other things. Watt maybe is not a very well-liked character, but aggressive and fit and could shoot. Everybody could shoot and shoot well. And most of them are carrying light machine guns. And so I know there's an impression from the Bush War that like everybody had demilled or like demarked FNFALs. Most of these SAS operators were carrying RPDs in 7.62x39.
Yeah.
Right? Like Russian light machine guns and
crazy
lots
fit,
of them.
Yeah, crazy fit, good shooters, good with the survival skills, but also smart, like really good and quick thinkers on their feet. Because when he's talking about laying an ambush, like sometimes they would just go and find a road that crossed from Mozambique into Rhodesia and then like lay mines or lay an ambush, and they would just wait for days on end for somebody to show up. But other times when he's talking about anti-tracking, means that like someone is chasing them, they're running away, but they're smart enough to be like, okay, we're going to cut through this area and lay obvious tracks, then double back so that we can lay an ambush on these people. They're doing this all on the fly.
Like purposely know that like, no. So we'll want them to go in that valley because we can get on that ridge right there. So you guys go set up. I'm going to run down here. And then, yeah, like he can purposely put them in a trap and just mow them down and then carry on as nothing happened.
All while they're being chased and they don't have a moment to take a pee, they're setting an ambush in their brain and being like, okay, so when we see this spot or we see this area that presents an opportunity, we're going to do this thing.
Yeah. Nuts.
And they would do it over and over and over again, and every time would be successful at it. Like, no wonder the enemy was not having a good time, as they put it.
Well, I mean, you kill a couple thousand terrorists, and they're going to be less excited about it.
Yeah.
And then they find out it's only 4 guys in the bush killing 1,000.
Yeah.
That was like one of my favorite ones of their engagements was where they laid an ambush, but nobody came for quite a while. Then somebody finally came, but they snuffed out the ambush, stopped short of it, but they still killed them all. Then left them there, waited for the second party to come looking for them, shot all of them, hit everything, and then waited for one more team to show up. And they got like 3 birds, stoned at once.
Or they would ambush somebody, shoot them all, leave the bodies, and then booby trap the bodies and wait for the second group of people to come and like go to like pick up their dead. And then the landmines that were all made like homemade by these guys and just blow them up. Like it's like
I think that was my favorite like follow on was I don't know where it is in this book. It's probably like in the early part of the 70s, like 74 to 76. The trucks with the food, like they go into Mozambique, they shoot a convoy, they stop some vehicles. The trucks are full of food. These guys haven't eaten, of course, in weeks because they've been in the bush. They barely have water. And they mine one of the trucks and then just sit back and wait. And like the next day, Frelimo soldiers come to collect up their stuff, and the booby-trapped trucks get detonated. Just destroys a whole nother element. It's like the patience. Patience is intense.
Well, I mean, smart enough that they would raid the food truck, stock up on food to replenish because they ain't getting a supply drop for another week. So they're on so they're possibly on not even full rations, but like third rations because they've got to make it like stretch out. So they would like eat all the food and then blow everyone else up.
That was another disappointing story in here because, and we should talk about Darrell Watt. We should talk about the SAS. But one of those pieces, I mean, the raiding of the food and the stealing of Frelimo or Zanla supplies, being sent into the bush on a 4-day mission, being there for like 3 days, and being told this is actually a 10-dayer. And we're not getting resupplied. And there's no food, there's no water, there's nothing coming, and you're just like, well, I guess I live in the jungle now.
Yeah, which is where their hunting and bushcraft skills have came in very, very handy. Because it's one thing if it's like you're going to be out there for a while. It's another thing when you've already been out there for a while and you've been eating your food, assuming you're coming back home the next day, only been told, you're going to be out here another week. Sorry, you only have 1 day of food left. Oh, we're not dropping more supplies.
I think that did get better as the war went on. I don't think they were in a good position early in the war, but as the war went on, I think that got better because they do talk about like hot food drops and they do talk about like ammo being choppered in and things. Especially by the time that that Watt is basically running an AO in southern Mozambique. I forget what the name of the mountain was, but they had basically set up a Renmo observation post with like 1,000 Renmo soldiers. And
it definitely they were getting better at having like chopper refueling things and like ammo dumps where they would sneak, a very small convoy, or they would chopper in supplies and have them waiting there for them to resupply to carry on hiking through the bush. it definitely got better as they went on, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty much in
Yeah.
line when they started doing the actual Fire Force missions where they just chopper people and drop them off, and because at that point they just go in with one chopper, drop the thing, and then go back to base sort of thing. So
And that's a whole amazing thing on its own. And the Fire Force missions that the RLI did, they are touched on in Handful of Hard Men because the SAS were a lot of the time calling in Fire Force missions.
Yeah.
So you put 4 dudes on a helicopter, dude with machine gun, dude with a radio, and 2 dudes with rifles. And you go, oi, terrorists. And then you wait for the helicopter to show up and the terrorists get shot. They get shot a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, the SAS guys would be doing like the recce end of it, where they'd be going in and observing everything and making all the notes and then
Plotting
radioing and being like, yeah, we found the guys. Let's go and fuck them up.
Well, can we touch on the radioing piece too? Because they said they only spoke in the clear using spoken language when they were in contact. Otherwise, it was all done as CW. So it was all Morse code. Like,
Yeah, I remember reading that. Like, being able to do Morse code.
yeah. So all of their
Great.
comms with comm ops and with Salisbury is all done as Morse code on like one of those things that you smash with your fingers. Like that's. And we're like, oh, the terrorists are over here. Okay, like, I realize it's the 70s is a different place than today, but like, and I looked
We
up
had already
something-
fought a couple of world wars on Morse code. We were kind of like past that by the time we got
right,
to
and
the
like
70s.
you got to imagine, like at the same time this is going on, the early part of the Bush wars, like from UDI through like the early part of the 70s, Vietnam is happening concurrently, right? And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like I've seen a lot of Vietnam movies. I've read a lot of Vietnam books.
Yeah.
Totally different technology and support structure.
Mhm.
Like, and these guys were basically at home. This was their own country. I mean, yeah, okay, excursions into Mozambique and Zambia and surrounding, but like,
Still the same stuff.
well, other than like the RPDs and the FALs, they were running everything was World War II equipment. This is what it was like.
wooden
All their
airplanes?
aircraft was all World War II.
Well, I mean, Rhodesia was the backwoods of the British Empire, right? So like they had some British backing to get going, but even most of that was done through a businessman, not the crown. Obviously, he had backing to get the whole thing going. So they were like, yeah, here's some stuff to look after your thing. Like, take this surplus garbage and like it should be fine for fighting the Zulus or whatever it was that the crown thought was there, right? They weren't expecting a war with
early in
communists
the
that was
pioneer
backed by the
days.
Russians and everything, right?
Yeah, sure. Early in the pioneer days. But I mean, like 50s and 60s, the Rhodesian Air Force is like a couple of hundred World War II aircraft.
Yeah.
And a
Like
few
the
World War
whole
II
Rhodesian
veterans.
Air Force is like a couple hundred World War II planes.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like
The
they
French
weren't
helicopters.
they weren't thinking of fighting a war against another power
Modern?
of that size. It was
Yeah.
just, it's going to be a couple of indigenous tribes or like they weren't expecting like the Russians and the communists to be backing them and giving them guns and training and all of the things, and even sending what we would now call observers.
Yeah. Technicians and other mercenaries.
So just out of curiosity, because I don't know this, but what would be the equipment you need to lug around to be able to communicate Morse code back then?
Probably
A TR-48 radio was the standard issued radio that they would have had. So it's a South African made.
Slightly stronger than a UV5R.
Well, it's a little boxy. It's like kind of this bigger than a paperback, not as big as a phone book.
Okay.
It's like the Zach Morris phone.
Yeah.
But big whip aerial. Like I want to say that the regular aerials were like, I think they were 11 feet long. It can't have been meters. It must have been in feet. It must be 11 foot is like the standard size radio. But the model number I think is a TR-48. It's a South African made military style radio. They're not terribly complicated radios, but it's like a CB size, kind of like what you'd have in your truck.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
I was thinking like, the guy had to have like the wires and the thing out and everything. I was like, imagine trying to.
Well, he would have
put
had to
that
have
into
some kind of a pad to whatever those
Yeah.
little devices are that you tap on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that has to be in your bag, and even though you're running, right, you can't. You probably want to
and your food,
break,
and your
yeah.
machine gun, and the
Yeah, so
ammo for the machine gun,
yeah.
and probably like a change of socks.
And if
Yeah,
your name is Horse, triple rations and 2 stoves.
Yeah.
Poor horse, man.
Poor horse.
And
Right,
like,
and
how many bags of potatoes?
At least.
Triple.
potatoes, onions, everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
get him to triple over some stubs at night. Yeah, but,
Yeah,
you know, like,
and
just thinking,
just add
Chased
on
by
to that,
an
like,
elephant or a rhino or whatever other dumb shit that guy had happen to
He
him.
got chased by an elephant, didn't he?
yeah, it
Yeah.
was an elephant. Yeah, it was an elephant. That one.
Yeah,
See,
and
a
isn't he
mother
also the one
elephant.
that woke up with the snake on his cock?
I don't think that was Horse, but yes, one of the fellows woke up with a.
Giant. Wasn't it a python on his sleeping bag?
No, it
Python
wasn't.
or a cobra. It was something
It was a
that you don't want
cobra.
to mess
It was
with.
a
Yeah.
cobra.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
it was one of the kind that'll
Yeah.
poison you, not strangle you.
Yeah, and he was worried that it was going to bite his morning glory.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or waking
that
up
one?
to having lions inside your Imagine setting
Yeah.
a perimeter with like tripwires and stuff and waking up with a lion next to your sleeping bag. That's a
And the
that's a
only
hard
reason-
pass for me.
Yeah,
And the only reason you woke up is because you smelled his breath.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's,
Like, that's the worst part. You did everything possible to be like, no, man, we'll hear him. And then
Yeah.
just be like, man, what smells? And it's just like, oh no. Like, yeah, I'll enjoy that from the
Try not
comfort
to
of my
poop
home.
yourself and keep calm. It's a lion right there.
yeah. So I guess we should talk a bit about what we should talk kind of maybe through some of the story arc of the book. Obviously, if people are familiar with Africa in the 70s, this is not news and it's not fiction. So most of this is really well documented. This particular book is about the Special Air Service Sea Squadron, particularly about Daryl Watt, who I don't think was very well liked by the people running the military in Rhodesia at the time.
But
I get
was
the
very
distinct
well liked
impression-
by the people under his command.
Under him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone thought of him as a
Yeah.
fucking absolute god among men, like literally a god among men. Like
Yeah.
they were graced by his presence if they came on their fire mission. You know.
Yeah.
everybody he reported to hated him. Everybody that reported to him loved him.
Which, I mean, it's
Well,
usually the sign of a good leader, right?
As it should be, pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess we should touch a little bit on for people that are not so familiar with the military or not so familiar with the British military. Maybe the SAS is a Tier 1 unit, Special Forces
Yeah.
unit for the British military, formed from the Long Range Desert Patrol groups of World War II. So they spent a lot of time fighting against the Africa Corps in, shockingly, Africa. So the SAS drew ranks from various Commonwealth services up until about the 60s, including South Africa and Rhodesia and Australia, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth countries. So when Rhodesia declared unilateral independence, they had their own squadron of SAS troops, which at the time was about 180 people, which is also about as big as the SAS got for the entire Bush War. For the whole 12 years that the conflict went on, they never had more than about 200 troops.
Yeah.
There's one point. I don't remember the name of the operation. It wasn't Op Dingo. It was in 77, I think. They attacked another free limo base in Mozambique, and they were using the same type of operational plan as Operation Dingo. They called up the entire SAS reserve, all of the active duty troopers. They brought back everyone who'd been seconded from everything else. They ended up with a total of 300 people to attack a
amazing.
communist base. Like it was a combination.
Is that
Zanla,
the farm when they had the
Yes, the
commercial
farm in-
airliner? Yeah.
yes,
that-
the farm
that
in
was-
Mozambique. I can't remember
yeah.
the name of the operation.
That whole thing was
I'm looking it up. Just give me a moment.
baller AF.
From
Well,
start
and
to
I mean,
finish.
so they didn't do such a good job on that one because they were going up against tanks and armored personnel carriers and dug in the anti-aircraft guns that had been well placed by Russian advisors.
Whatever they
But-
want. I mean, there's a few other times where they like airdropped right into the middle of a camp in the middle of night and didn't realize it until they woke up. And then we're like, fuck, how do we get out of this?
This
And
looks
then
like
just-
a good
yeah.
bush to hide in.
Yeah, then
Yeah, we'll
shot a
hide in
bunch of
this
people and ran away, and it worked out for them just fine.
Yeah.
I mean, they were using homemade bombs made out of like 50-gallon drums, and just like
Oh, the alpha bombs.
yeah,
Yeah.
just launching them.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, like the SAS are like the badasses of the British military. Is
Yeah,
So they would be the preeminent tier 1 special forces.
Yeah.
they're like the Delta Force that people are
Yeah.
probably a little bit more
Well, so
familiar with.
Delta Force is modeled on the SAS model. Right?
Exactly, that's what I mean.
well, and that's why like you look at like the slogan, you know, those who dare win was the SAS motto, and then like this one of the other spec ops teams was their motto was "We dare" or something like that.
We dared or something. Yeah.
You know, it was like a direct little, you know, tip of the hat to them, but yeah, you guys think you're badass, but we're the ones that actually dared. And like, you know, there's some good camaraderie and back and forth between stuff like that. But yeah, these are like
all the time.
You know, aside from like the Devil's Brigade, like these guys were like the original commando special forces group.
Which is, I mean, it's funny that you choose the word commando for that, because they were working with guys from like 2 and 3 Commando RLI who get referred to as donkeys. Oh, we have some
Yeah.
donkeys to carry the mortars for us. And
Yeah.
it's like, what? These are guys that are doing 3 airborne drops a day in 1976 to kill terrorists. Like, they're jumping out of wooden World War II planes 3 times a day to shoot terrorists with an FN.
Yeah.
And they're getting looked down upon. And I mean, like, understandably, like, these guys are running 20 kilometers a day with 100-pound packs, and they're killing terrorists by running them down.
Yeah.
We talk about that at the beginning
They're
of the
killing
book.
terrorists by
about how they
running
hunt.
them down. That's insane. Could you imagine chasing somebody for 20 kilometers and being like, haha, shot you, you're dead?
Yeah.
That's
But
they
yeah,
talk
like,
about
you know,
that at
you
the
look at
beginning of
it-
the book. Yeah. Well,
You look at it this
for
way,
how they
like, yeah,
hunt.
so like the Fire Force guys, like they're dropping 3 times a day, which means that like they aren't moving very far, at least not by foot. They're not, they go in with big guns, shoot a bunch of stuff, then get airlifted out immediately. They would be like, you know, the shock troopers, right? They drop in, they blast everybody, and then they get the hell out of there. And they would do that 3 times a day, which is pretty badass. Like, don't get me wrong, like Vietnam paratrooper or World War II paratrooper was a veteran after 1 jump. These guys are doing like 3 a day, like 5 days a week.
I think they still hold the record for the most amount of combat drops.
Well,
Yeah, because 3 times a day for 12 years. Well, not quite
except for
12
maybe
years, but
Rico's
like
Roughnecks, but that hasn't happened yet.
on the bounce.
Yeah, I just wanted to
I'm
say
just trying to
that-
give Gavin PTSD.
Yeah, they talk about it at the beginning of the book, just about like where Daryl and some of the other guys get their bushcraft from and how they hunted, you know, as children and teenagers growing up, and like that's what they would do is, you know, they would hunt something and they would chase after it for 20-30K till the
Well,
animal was
that-
tired, and they would just shoot it, and it transferred very well to human targets.
And not just that. So a lot of these guys learned, and so this whole Bush War thing got like much like many other wars in history where there may or have not been like a bit of a racial component to it. This gets a very bad rap on the racial side of things. Because of just like the minority whites were the ones that were in control of the country, and the majority blacks were not. But a lot of these guys that were in the SAS and just in Rhodesia in general grew up with the black population, and a lot of these guys learned their bushcraft skills and their hunting skills and everything from their friends that were native to the area. So we're, you know, black Africans, not, you know, new white Africans. And they give them all the credit in the world and say, like, we had a great relationship with them. And like, this is where we learned these skills that
They were our best
basically
friends
made it
going
so that
around,
we were
yeah.
successful and we survived,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy that you can, yeah, like towards the beginning of the book, like, you know, it's just But yeah, like they just one guy, or sorry, and I think it was Daryl and Mr. Watt and a few of them. Yeah, they learned. They just went in the bush with a few people, and they're like, "Yeah, let's go hunt the lion today." And like they learn how to follow tracks, how to cover their tracks, how to just see anything and everything that we could try as hard as we can to walk by and try and notice, and we'd probably miss. And yeah, it was just, years of doing that and how that can transfer to, I mean, we've all evolved from animals and everything. So I'm like, at the end of the day, the instincts are the same-ish. But I mean, we follow tracks just like they follow tracks. They follow scent. I mean, we follow tracks more than scent because I mean, I'm pretty sure we can find these guys. Yeah, all depending.
After 6 weeks in the bush, they probably stink pretty bad. But yeah,
I'm pretty sure
that was mentioned.
Yeah.
Walk by a bush and just be like, something don't smell right in there, man. But it's just crazy to see how that and learning that can just transfer so easily to them and give them such a huge advantage, right? Even though they got 200 guys behind them, they can't figure out if they went left, right, forward, backwards, and next thing you know, they're getting shot behind them, right?
Yeah, and having taken some tracking classes and taking tracking classes from a guy that was actually in the bush war, like my skill set doesn't even like scratch the surface to the guy that I learned from. And like you could see this guy like instantly just like, and yeah, these guys grew up. This is what they did as kids for fun. They would go and hunt lions because what the hell else do you do in Africa? And yeah, they just got better at it the more that they did it. And yeah, to the point where like they're tracking people that are actively running away from them and running them down while they're carrying 100-pound packs. And that's insane. And to Darrell Watt's credit, he was doing it with 300 pounds. His pack and his left and right nut also wearing 100 pounds each.
Well, let's. I've got a memory of Darrell Watt from someone coincidentally named Gavin, and then I want to jump way back to the beginning of the book and talk about growing up in Africa. This is Gavin speaking. I don't know what operation this is. This is probably around 1975. One of my best memories of Darrell during this time was taking OP watch from him one evening on the mountain. He was sitting quietly on a rock watching the sun go down. The view was stunning. We could see forever. I sat down, and instead of him going back into cover to take his rest, he seemed to want to talk. He told me that it just occurred to him that he had been on this mountain 10 years previously when he was attached to the Portuguese army. I thought about how much he had seen and done, and it made a massive impression on me. Then he went quiet again, and we both watched the black-breasted snake eagle fly right past us. It was a surreal feeling. All was so quiet, peaceful, and pretty, with Darrell reminiscing and knowing that that night we were going to go back down that fucking mountain and lay more mines while trying to avoid being killed by the fucking Freds and Zanla gooks that were crawling all over the place trying to find us. Darrell was such a machine, and I was in such awe of him. It was nice to know he had feelings and thoughts like the rest of us lesser mortals. This is a guy that spent a lot of time in Mozambique working for Watt.
Yeah.
And then if we go way back early in the book, see if I can find my place marker here. So this is part of the author's note. This isn't even technically in the book yet. I've used the word terrorist in the book with some reservation when referring to the armed members of Zanla and Zipra. Some would argue that terrorist is someone who uses violence in order to achieve a political end. That is to oversimplify. Few wars are fought without a political objective, and we invariably accept that the combatants are soldiers, not terrorists. I use the word because their methodology for waging war was in the main not synonymous with what one expects from soldiers. I say in the main because all who fought in this war will readily acknowledge that there were men and women within the ranks of the enemy who fought bravely and honorably for a cause they believed in and are deserving of respect. But alas, they were in a minority. The facts show very clearly that the overwhelming majority of targets attacked by the armed forces deployed by the anti-Rhodesian movement were of a civilian nature, and only in rare cases were military facilities or personnel the focus of their attention. This conduct has no symmetry with the soldiering and so I feel at liberty to generalize at times and refer to the men who serve Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkambo as terrorists. Efforts by the wartime Rhodesian government to draw the world's attention to the conduct of the men who served Mugabe and Nkrumah fell on resolutely deaf ears. The ire of the international community was reserved almost exclusively for those who sought to stem their terrible tide. This was partly because this conflict was erroneously viewed as black versus white in Africa, as in much of the world. When such a comparison is made, there can only possibly be one victim and one villain. This dreadful misjudgment resulted in power passing to the new rulers in the name of freedom, and a country brimful of promise had been ruined, reducing millions to poverty and misery. So yeah, to our Gavin's point, not Gavin in the book, terrorists.
Yep.
Are we
I'm
sure
not-
it's not the same Gavin?
Reasonably, because unless our Gavin is also the Highlander, I've seen our Gavin age.
Have you ever seen us in the same room together?
No, I have not.
Just saying.
I don't know if I want to rate this. I have a very long passage about the anti-tracking and culling of animals. I don't know if that's worth reading. Suffice to say that, yeah, before being enlisted into the army. So I guess of note, Rhodesia was a mandatory service country. So if you were a dude growing up in Rhodesia, eventually you got to be in the army. That was just the rules. Between school and the army, Watt worked for the Rhodesian Meat Company, shooting game with a very effective 30-06.
Yeah.
And he had 2 black Africans that worked for him as trackers that he learned all of his bushcraft from. And at one point, they told him to stop shooting so many animals because they were tired.
They didn't
He went
want to
from-
bring him back out.
Yeah, well, because Watt went from being the new guy, who, mind you, is a 17, 18-year-old kid just out of high school, to being the top earner in the company.
So this guy was in crazy good shape from the get-go.
Right. So that's what I mean. Like, so this guy left school, and he in his own words, Watt says he was a mediocre student. But he's like, well, I'm going to learn how to hunt and shoot, and I like outdoorsy stuff, so I'm going to go and do that. So he went and gets a job, and he goes from being the new guy to being the top earner in the span of a couple months. And
Yeah.
the Africans that he had working for him, like literally one day stole his bullets and ran away because they didn't want to run down any more game, because he was running down African plains game 20 or 30 kilometers a day at a time, shooting multiple animals. And
I
it's
mean,
I
to be
can
fair, his
understand
job
not
description never really changed, just his employer.
you're not
Valid.
wrong. Not
Well,
wrong.
And what was it like when you say multiple? Was it like, am I wrong when I remember 30 animals one day and then they're like, yeah, no, we're done?
I don't know if it was 30, but I know it was quite a number. And yeah, like the guys like took the bullets and said, like, you're done for today, man. We got to drag all this back, you know? And yeah, I remember that. I laughed quite a bit at that.
Yeah, so
I
this
don't-
was in Matabele land working for Alan Savory. I don't see, obviously, in the passage I have highlighted. It's around here somewhere, but yeah. He shot a lot of... I want to say it was elands. But he shot a lot of something one day. And yeah, his trackers took the bullets and hid them.
Yeah, because they had there was just too much game around. They had to kind of moderate everything. It was eating. Were they eating too much vegetation that other animals were suffering?
It was a carrying problem in Matabele land. There's too much game for the capacity of the reserves.
Yeah.
At
So there was
the time.
Yeah. And fortunately, at the time, there were no internet famous animals like Cecil the lion around to have him get any negative attention for doing his job.
Yeah.
We already touched on the SAS stuff. I guess of the SAS stuff, I do have one section that is relevant for our considerations. See if I can find the passage I want on this page. So this is very early in the book. This is while Watt's going through his SAS training as an enlisted person. I guess of note, later Watt's commissioned from the ranks from being an enlisted trooper. He eventually gets commissioned as an officer in the army in the SAS. Dave Westerhout, Rhodesia's world practical pistol champion, provided expert instruction in the use of sidearm, and extremely high standards were expected. Rob Johnstone, a former SAS training officer, recalls, shooting was always competitive and a prize was presented to the worst shot in the form of a cowbell, suspended around the neck and quaintly named the shit shot bell. The prize was open to all ranks and was to be worn at all times except in bed. Amazingly, no one ever won it twice. So these guys brought in what would have been like a precursor to IPSC, world's champion pistol shooter, to teach their special forces dude how to shoot 9mm pistols.
Yeah.
There's hope for us yet.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that IPSC guys aren't good shooters, but they've gone a weird direction in that they don't allow camo anymore, when here they were teaching guys in the military how to shoot. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's fair. There's a lot of small technical details in this book that I really wish they had. I don't know, like almost another book or a section of this book just on like TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Because like talking about the SAS training, they mention anti-tracking, but they don't really go into a lot of the detail around anti-tracking. And at points in the book, you get some of the spore tracking and anti-tracking that Watt uses, like using bushes to scrape their tracks off out of the dirt, to go barefoot in places, to wear tackies instead of combat boots. So you get some of those little tidbits. And the same thing during SAS training. They changed how they do rifle shooting because the way that conventional rifle shooting was being taught, there was a tendency for shots to be missing high above the enemy. So the Rhodesian army started to use much smaller targets, much closer to the ground. So you were much more of a grazing fire technique.
Well, it'd be simulating the enemy being prone.
But that's not how other armies in the 1960s were training their recruits.
Yeah. I think they just did a lot of that Pavlovian style training that they picked up on and utilized to make their people more efficient. Because if you look at their kill ratios and stuff like that, like it was insane. But I think I have one of the things that might help you get some more of those TTPs here, Andrew, that I'm happy to share with you. I have the Rhodesian SAS Combat.
SAS Combat. I'm excited. Does it come with a complimentary pair of short shorts?
No, but I do have your short shorts here that I can drop off at the same time as I give you this.
That sounds way worse for everyone else.
Yeah, it definitely does.
There was a group buy of Rhodesian short shorts. I happen to have mine on right now.
But without that backstory, that sounds very weird for everyone else that my shorts are at your house.
Especially when you start that saying it was a group thing. Doesn't help.
Whatever. It's the current year. We're reading a handful of hard men. Also, oddly enough, the name of Trudeau's autobiography. And Sophie's. Not the same book.
Not the same person either.
Well, there's so many good passages that I have highlighted. I don't know that there's any that are really, because I mean, really, I could just read the whole book.
Yeah.
I was just about to say, I was like, you could just read the whole book and that'd be your good passage from it.
But that's why there's so much stuff in the, like, for the YouTube listeners, the entire book is full of Post-it notes.
Yeah.
That's how I do my book club notes, is I do them all on Post-it so that I can take them out when I'm done. There are so many good pieces in this book. I do wish that the TPPs were a separate item, because there are little small tactical things about how they do small unit stuff, about how they do movement, about how they do what do you do? Advanced contact drills. Name escaped me there. There's a lot of small stuff in there that I think is highly applicable for not just bush war operators.
Yeah. But yeah, you should definitely get a copy of this book, because I think this explains some things that you might be interested in a little bit more detail.
Well, I will take you up on that, Gavin.
Yeah. Also for people local, now that the overlords have granted us, or will be in the next 2 days, the ability to have larger outdoor gatherings for anybody that is interested in hearing a little bit about tracking. Maybe we can put something together, because I need to practice.
Thing, bro. I shoot the guns.
Yeah, but I need to practice. So by me showing you guys how to do the things, it's me practicing. So skill shares and drinking beer or something.
Just look for empty bottles and follow them.
Yeah.
So you find the guy passed out.
I'd have a beer.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Feedback, Canadian Patriots Podcast. If you want to learn fun things and drink beer.
I just can't believe that, like, as much shit that these soldiers went through and how hard they had to push and all the insane things they needed to do, they still had time and they still had the motivation to fuck with each other. Tripping other soldiers, or like not telling them about obstacles coming up when the guy behind you is wearing like 3 times the amount of weight you are, and just laughing about it.
Well, and like the thing, they didn't really talk about it in this one, but in the other one, the other book written sort of from a different perspective, but all about the same people from the same time, they talk about the times when they were in camp and they had like Batman and everything. Like, you know, it's almost like they went back to like medieval times, is where they had like pages and stuff, like making them dinner and doing all of the things. And it wasn't just like 12 dudes in the woods on a extended hike with no supplies. It was like, oh, we would set up like a fob or something like that, where we would have like manservants that would do all the stuff for us. So all we had to go and do is like go off and fight the war during the day and come back to camp, and everything would be taken care of for us. So it's kind of funny how they would go from like that extreme to like, well, we were making cups of tea with the same tea bag for a whole week or something ridiculous, like
just 10 times and then eat the tea bag.
Yeah.
That's because we ran out of food 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, tea was vital because, at their core, they were still, Commonwealth.
British.
Yeah.
Brit-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, no, it was just crazy to see. Like, so was it at the beginning of the book where they were saying that Rhodesia was, I want to say it's chapter 1 or 2, where they were talking about where they pretty much built the country without going into debt? Were they talking about Rhodesia at the beginning?
Yeah, that's the beginning of chapter 1. The seeds of the future conflict were sown when Kimberley mining magnate Cecil John Rhodes turned his attention to spreading the imperial gospel north and into the wild, uncharted African hinterland. And it goes on from there. But I mean, the country is named for this dude. So this guy had a bunch of mines in South Africa. Kimberley is in South Africa. And he turned a couple hundred people loose, went north, and in the span of 100 years, pioneered a country, committed to 2 world wars, built modern technology, cities and infrastructure, declared independence from the British, fought a bush war, lost a bush war, and were dissolved as a country in the span of 100 years.
He also had a scholarship named after him.
That's true. Rhodes does have a scholarship named after him.
Yeah, quite a prestigious one, in fact. If you were named a Rhodes Scholar, that's something to be proud of. Although I guess now it's looked down upon as being racist because, this guy had some agency to go and do all this stuff.
Well, the part about that kills me was that if Rhodes didn't send, what was the name of that captain I forget the fellow that led that first expedition and pitched a tent and they called it Fort Victoria there. The Shangani patrol guy. I forget his name now. It'll probably come to me. If they didn't go into Rhodesia, other Native African tribes probably would have genocided the Shona people, and Robert Mugambi would never have existed.
Fuck that guy.
Sorry, was that a fuck that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Fuck that guy. Fuck Robert Mugambi and Joshua Nkomo.
No como.
And also that guy that was running Mozambique, Matchell.
Yeah.
And also the British and the Portuguese while we're at it.
Yeah.
Well,
Agreed.
I mean, the Portuguese are the reason why the Marxists were running Mozambique, but
Yeah, because they abandoned it.
Yeah.
But let's be fair. If that didn't happen, we wouldn't have the Mozambique drill,
true.
which is fun. And I was doing that at the range today. So,
Could be fun, yes.
I guess you gotta take the wins where you can.
No, you got to channel your inner Darrell Watt and just make the wins happen.
Also true.
And that was the part about the book that, like, the whole read was good. I don't want to say the last two chapters were bad, but like, just the balls to the wall. Yeah, the balls to the wall. These guys, what they did, they bent over backwards to do everything. And even in, like, previous chapters, they talk about the whole political implications. And like, these guys went balls to the wall, did stuff that if you were to think without knowing this story, just be like, 200 guys against 10,000. Man, they're not going to win.
No friggin' way. Yeah.
No, man, there's no way in hell that's going to happen, right? Even though they've done everything, like 90%, if not, pretty much the reason, even though they won anything and everything they could think of, it was all ruined and shat in the bed by politicals, oh no, we'll do this,
and even then it wasn't even like all of the politicians like it seems to be lately. It was just a couple of the people in key positions like Flowers.
Fuck Ken Flower, he's right up there with Mugambe.
Like just so many pawns that want to move a few things. No, don't worry. If this happens, we'll scratch your back, right? I
get it.
agree to that.
You've got to push the political solution at the same time that you push the war solution, because there's some benefits to ending it peacefully and like without spending all of the the human capital and the money capital, right? Like there's some benefits to just like getting an amicable resolution to all this stuff.
We can spend the range instead of people's faces.
But also, like, there's a time when you can talk to someone and proceed on a honest, or at least mostly honest, discussion and trying to accomplish some things. But like, when your own people are out to screw you and are holding the people that are winning the war back and preventing them from actually winning the war, because they were.
Peter Wells at the end of the book, Ken Flower for, the entire time that Ken Flower was in charge of CIO, in charge of the Rhodesian Intelligence Service. Whoever was giving information to literally every foreign intelligence service, the Israelis, the Russians, the Americans, like the Brits, just take your pick. Honestly, so on my list of things to do, and I had to get my wife to sign off on it, is I'm in the process of tracking down a copy of Bitter Harvest, Ian Smith's autobiography. So Ian Douglas Smith would have been the prime minister in Rhodesia. He was the head of the government for almost the entire 12 years that they were at war. So he was responsible for declaring independence from Britain. And he ran the government until 78 or 79?
Basically right up until they were sort of in that weird transitionary period or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was April 79-ish when that bishop got put in charge of the then renamed Rhodesia, Zimbabwe.
Yeah. So it was after the Bush War, but it wasn't quite when they were Zimbabwe.
Well-
It was in that weird reorganizing phase
And that's the thing is
where
like it wasn't really over.
June
'cause
79.
They were still
Yeah.
running. Thank you, June 79. So they were still running operations in Mozambique, and like Op Hurricane was done. Most of the internal,
Oh, there it goes.
like they almost destroyed Frelimo,
yeah.
but
They were maybe like one major campaign away from just finishing the whole thing off. Really.
well,
Yeah,
that's
because-
the yeah.
I mean, if
Because
they had
wasn't
just if they had just let them go and do what they were good at, like going into other people's places and fucking their shit up, and
Well,
like
if
let
the
them
SAS and the RLI were allowed to do
bomb
their
the
jobs,
harbors and bomb the bridges and the
Exactly.
power plants like they were trained to do, this whole thing could have been over a lot faster and a lot more positively for the Rhodesians
and
with
look
a
at how
lot less
many people were
casualties.
defecting in Mozambique and leaving Frelimo and joining the Renma troops.
Yeah, and if you look at, I mean, Zimbabwe today, Mozambique today, and several of the other nations that were all involved in that whole conflict and that ended up going socialist or communist, they're much worse off than they are now. Like the only people that seem to be as a nation as a whole even on par or slightly ahead is like South Africa, because they didn't go that route, but like
Well, and
They're well on their way with all the raping.
but they are now.
Yeah.
I specifically blame the Dutch people in South Africa for the
Yeah.
fall of Rhodesia because it. Well, no,
They were
mean,
neither
so-
here nor there. They were right on the fence, 50-50, one way or the other.
Yeah, just wouldn't help.
I mean,
but like,
okay, so I do kind of enjoy making the Dutch jokes because Marty's not here to defend himself.
yeah,
but
yeah,
also,
exactly. Get on here, Marty.
well, no. So this was a criticism of Smith. That is that South Africa was too Dutch. This was a criticism that Smith had of his neighbor, but the South African government, Vorst, that was the PM's name at the time.
Yes,
I think it was
believe
Vorst.
so.
Well, yeah.
I think so.
He was specifically using Rhodesia as a buffer between Mozambique and Zambia and South Africa.
Yeah, he was
Right, like
playing
he
the
was
political game.
He was
And-
totally playing the South African Defense Force. The South African Air Force is backing the Rhodesians. The South African Defense Force has some T-34 tanks that we confiscated from some ship in the Indian Ocean. Then we're giving them to Rhodesia. We're giving you a bunch of demarked FNFALs that you can use to shoot communists
Yeah,
with. But ooh, things don't look so good this week on Fleet Street in the UK. So we're actually going
gonna
to pull our air assets back, and you don't get any helicopter support, even though you really, really need it for this operation.
Yeah, but they were trying to,
Yeah,
Vorst
was an asshole.
they were trying to play both horses in the race, right? Like,
Yeah.
and just
Which
and
is like
hedge
the
their
worst
bet.
thing you
Like,
could possibly do.
Well,
Which,
and
like,
At least
for
when
them,
at least
what
with
it-
your enemy, you know they're your enemy. But when they keep like fainting and kind of helping, but not really fucking helping in the long run,
Well,
it's
and-
way more detrimental and way more annoying and just
and
way
what did
more
that get South
douchery.
Africa in the long run? Like,
Yeah.
South Africa managed to be South Africa for another 20 years.
yeah,
It's a shithole now. Highest death rate in the world.
But that's what I
and,
mean. Like,
you know,
they're
farmers
doing the
getting
same
raped
farm
and
attacks in
pillaged every
South
day.
Africa now that they had in Rhodesia in 72.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
but
the
I mean,
same
that's,
farm attacks being done by the same types of people.
well, that's the problem though, is that we didn't learn anything since then, and they certainly didn't learn anything since then, and they've just continued to march down that road, albeit slower.
Yeah.
But also don't have any like amazing SAS people to defend themselves either.
But I mean,
Well,
this is
I
where
don't know.
they.
I have some very positive things to say about the South African Defense Force and the South African SAS.
Okay.
I mean, these guys are tough, and like a lot of people that like were in Rhodesia left to go to South Africa because at least it was
Yeah.
like closer
the
to
same.
home than it, like
Yeah. Closer to home than going back to
Yeah.
Britain or Australia or
at least
Canada.
the random murderings in the middle of the night stopped up until recently.
And I mean, going back to the 70s, right? Like, I mean, if you didn't have a reporter there and never make it to the news compared to anybody and everybody that has a Facebook account, a cell phone now.
Even when
pretty
it
much all
did
over the
make it to the news, all of the spin and political bullshit
Yeah.
that got
There,
put
there
onto
were
this.
very, very few positive
Yeah.
video clips
but-
or news reports that came out of this for the Rhodesians.
Right.
It was,
And the
And that's
one
what I'm-
time that it did, this is in the next book.
Yeah.
They specifically called the reporters to come along with them immediately after, so there was pure
No
proof
question.
of what
That
happened there, no
operations is
question.
in this
And
book as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's in this book as well. I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, but like that's the thing, right? Like now it's like, nobody would report the news except for reporters back in the 70s. Right? You didn't have all these people's cell
Well,
phones
and
and everything.
you didn't
So-
have full-time news services that we do. There was no
Yeah.
24/7 cable news. Like CNN wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So if someone was to record something, right? Oh, well, here's the recording, and they'd have to like send the whole big roll of film or VHS or whatever it was then, right? Back somewhere for them to duplicate, right? Like there wasn't internet access like there is now, where literally if you've got a smartphone, you can be a reporter around the world.
Yep.
Right? So, I mean, like thinking, let's say what happened in Rhodesia happened now, and, availability of everything that is available technology wise nowadays being to sort of what it was or what it is, readily available for us here in Canada and along a lot of countries. Would it have been reported differently? Could the outcome have come out a little different and people realize that like, wow, they're really.
I don't know. I mean, it was so
I
easy.
as of now, no.
I would say like
I don't-
it was
I
so
don't think
easy
it'd be
back then
different.
to paint them all as racist. I think it would be even easier now.
Yeah, that's
Well, and
Yeah.
I don't think you would have somebody like, and I don't like Kissinger, but I don't think you have somebody that the Americans have under their control that was actually advocating for global peace. Because as much as I don't like Kissinger and I don't like the American policy of the 1970s, I think Kissinger was at least acting in the best faith of anyone that the Rhodesian government negotiated with during their 12 years. Right?
Yeah.
Like the Brits
Facts.
never bargained with them fairly.
No, but I
Bunch of-
mean,
bunch of two-timing mother
at the
truckers.
same, can you like, well,
Right?
but like,
the Chinese and the Russians would have loved to take over Southern Africa. The
Yeah.
Chinese are still in the process of taking over Southern Africa, and Russia's changed governments since then. But like,
Can you explain
Yeah.
something to me? I kind of missed that point in the book though. Why was Britain so against protecting, what was essentially
Can-
one of their children? Why did they forsake them? I missed that point in the book.
because they declared independence.
because they were butthurt. Basically, like they went to the UK and said like, hey, we want to do this thing and do whatever. They're like, no, you can't do that. They're like, okay, well, fuck you. We're doing it anyways.
But I mean, we
And-
claimed independence from them. They didn't.
No, we
forsake
Well,
us,
asked
right?
politely, and
We
then
asked
the
politely.
states fought for it, and then Rhodesia tried to
Well,
follow
and
in the same
have
footsteps as
to-
them. And
so
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of geopolitics here that I am not well versed in. But the short version, as I understand it, the last country before Rhodesia to violently separate from Britain was America.
Yeah.
Right, 1776, Rocket's Red Glare founded a new state. Okay, Canada. We'd politely like to have self-governance, please, eh? Moose and stuff, too.
But not completely
the
separate.
rest of the Commonwealth.
you can tell us still what to do, and we'll do it.
yeah, you're still
And
the
you
head of
can
the
approve
government.
all of our laws.
Yeah.
And
And
So
we'll pay someone
other-
a crazy amount of money to take your position. You don't have to come over. We'll give them a house,
Yeah.
give them something for a few years, and we'll get them to put their Johnny Hancock on a piece of paper, and
Let
it'll
them
be the
talk shit
exact
about our
same as
country.
you.
Well, you can't say John Hancock. That'll evoke
Yeah.
American sentimentalities. So
Yeah.
we went through a different process. Other Commonwealth countries at the same time, because I mean, remember, Britain controlled a large part of the globe at one point in history,
Yeah.
including a big chunk of Africa.
Yeah.
Other countries, other European colonial powers also controlled large chunks of Africa. The French, the Spanish, and the Portuguese, right?
And the Dutch.
The Dutch to a certain degree, but I mean that was a little bit different. The Dutch,
They had
I mean,
half of what
how
everyone
many
else
countries
did.
did the Dutch? Well, okay, so I mean, I'm making a little bit of fun of the Dutch, but Marty's not here to defend himself. But
They did invent the
Dutch
canoe, though.
thing was more merchanty than like political landmass. Put up a Dutch flag. It was more like, well, we want to run a bunch of trading companies, so could we just send some ships and like do some import export stuff?
Yeah,
right? That
I
was
mean
more
they
the
had
Dutch style,
they
where
they locked down that slave trade thing going between like Africa, the Caribbean, and then the New World. That was their deal, along
right.
with like literally everyone else. But like,
But the Dutch had a lot of that trading
Yeah.
and import-export type business.
They
The
were good
other
at making
colonial
boats.
powers were simply like, put flags on Earth and call it ours, right? Like
yeah, they
the
were more
British Empire
concerned
at one
about
point had
area, not finance.
right, and part of that is also exporting colonial power, because like you have a small island nation like Britain, you have a lot of people, you need to give them something to do so they don't revolt in Britain. So you send them to places
What?
like India and South Africa and Australia and so on.
Small landmass, large population requires resources that need to be gathered elsewhere. Let's capture resources, send back home.
So all this to say that through the 1950s and 60s, the boundaries in Africa were being redrawn, because
Yeah.
everything kind of got divided up post World War II. So about 1945 to 1947, the Ottoman and British Empire sort of divided up the northern part of Africa and the southern part of Africa. So all the colonial powers had the coastal parts of Africa. Central Africa, basically nobody wanted it because it was in the middle and it's bullshit. There's nothing there. Sorry
No
to the
reason
people in
for
the
it.
Congo.
Pythons and
Yeah.
lions.
Well, it's like Central
yeah.
Africa is hard to get to, and there's not a lot of good stuff there. But like you get
There's no
Southern Africa, you get
strategic
like
value
mineral
to it.
deposits.
Yeah, like the
Diamond.
Middle
You get, like,
East,
diamond mines, and
oil,
stuff.
Yeah.
the coast, a good place to go to like have a port to trade to get to the rest of the place, or a stopover to refuel to get to other places in the world. Right in the heart of Africa.
Right.
Back
So
then,
you get things
why?
like the Strait of Tiran and other places. So like the British Empire, after the Ottoman Empire folded, the Brits took over a lot of northern Africa, like Egypt and surrounding area, eventually British Palestine, and they carved out Israel at one point in whatever that was, 45, 46.
Yeah.
So the British Empire sort of divided up Africa into like the current format, right? And they'd already had colonies there for 50 or 60 years prior to that, right? South Africa before that, and Rhodesia in the 1870s.
I mean, that's where the G&T comes from.
Right. So in the 50s and 60s, following the war in the Congo, a lot of the colonial powers wanted to divest themselves from Africa, because part of it was shrinking global empires, and part of it was the beginnings of current globalism. Modern telecommunications and electrical infrastructure comes into play. So you don't have like T-clippers as being the most expedient way to send material across the world. It wasn't being done by sailboat anymore. You have more modern conveniences, and you start to have global markets forming.
Well, and as technology improved as well, you didn't need a small outpost in the middle of nowhere to be able to transmit Morse code signals. The signals would travel much further. So like in cases like Australia, there's like little towns in the middle of the outback that exist purely because the power that they had to transmit a signal via the wires would only go X amount of distance. So they had to build a town here in order to relay the signal to the next town down the road, to the next town down the road, to the next town down the road. As they got better at that, they didn't need that anymore.
So if you look at the history of other African nations in the say 1960s, roughly plus or minus 10 years, 65 plus or minus 10 years, the formation and growth of Israel, the Arab states changing, and then in southern Africa, all of the colonial powers divesting themselves, the Portuguese getting out of Mozambique, incidentally around the same time that UDI was declared in Rhodesia, northern Rhodesia becoming Zambia, north of the Zambezi River, South Africa wanting to still be South Africa, but South Africa had already gone through its own whole thing, because again, they're very Dutch. They'd already gone through their whole own thing, and they wanted to not be, well, they wanted to not be as Dutch. So they'd already gone through kind of an independence thing, and the Afrikaners had already become their own political power and national group, and they didn't have that tie to their parent country anymore. They weren't a colonial power. so there's this whole divestment that's going on, and at the same time you have America, Russia, and China all growing as world superpowers following the war, right? So you're 20 years after World War II. You have all of these nuclear powers now coming into their own. The old colonial powers are shrinking and giving up territory, or they're allowing that territory to become governed independently. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other factors at play,
Or
but all of
some
that's
weird
suffice to say.
independent but not quite independent, as is the case with like most Commonwealth nations, where like the Queen is still our figurehead and they did rubber stamp everything. But yeah,
But like at the end of the, but near the end of the war, like, you know, like the last two chapters, like the British are getting benevolent, you know what I mean? Like they're getting malicious in their espionage and you know.
because
Well, I think
well,
the British always were.
and they're butthurt. Like everyone else basically said, you know, if it pleases the crown, might we please make decisions that affect our land mass on our own while still, you know, tipping the hat to you, milady. Whereas like,
And they got away with that for a long time because like
yeah,
Rhodesia was on a path, this like a similar path to Canada until the middle 60s, right? They were basically a self-governing colony for 10 plus years, almost 15 years.
yeah,
But the crown wanted the white minority Rhodesians to give up control of their country. And you have to remember, Smith saw it as his country, right? He was
He was
born
the
there,
guy
he grew
running
up
it.
there. He was the prime minister. He'd been in politics for a long time. He'd served in the Air Force during the World War. He flew for the Rhodesian Air Force under the Royal Air Force in World War II. Like he learned how to fly bombers in England. So like
Yeah.
they are ostensibly a British country, British colony, but they've basically been on their own since the middle 50s.
Yeah.
And they were being told by England to give over your control of your country to the natives.
And basically, like, you know, all the things that he did is the same thing that, like, you know, Johnny Mapleseed did over here, where, like, yeah, we were under the, you know, Red Ensign and the Union Jack and all of that stuff, but like those are the guys that made Canada Canada. And that's what helped us gain our independence and all that. We made a name for ourselves. He did the same thing for his country, but they kind of shat all over that, whereas like we got to become an official country with the rubber stamp thing, not like a real country.
Official.
Yeah.
Yeah, an official country as opposed to a real country.
Yeah.
For a
We
time,
officially
anyways.
have some sort of vague independence as opposed to real independence like the United States that just declared independence.
Yeah, for a
Well, and
short period
I
of
think
time.
that ultimately is what offended a lot of the British nobility and British politicians was that
Yeah.
Rhodesia just like flipped them with the bird and said, this is what we're doing because we're tired of it and we're not just handing our country over. We're going to keep running our country and you can go and have relations with yourself.
Yeah.
They've
I
been
don't know if
doing
that
it
does
for
a
how long?
yeah, I don't know if that does a very good job of answering Dave's question, but there's a lot of geopolitical things going on at that point, and
But,
colonial powers are divesting themselves of Africa in the 60s.
But they want to do it on their terms, not the African country's terms, right? Like it would have been one thing if like the crown was just like whatever, like take a hike, Rhodesia. You know, it's like anything, right? Like when you want it, you can't have it. When you don't want it, you know.
Had they not declared UDI, I don't think that they would have achieved any reasonable level of self-governance. I think the British Crown would have turned them over to popular elections, and maybe it's not Mugabe that got put in charge right away, but somebody like that would have been put in charge. Some African National Council person would have won some sort of flawed or rigged election.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at what happened in like the United Kingdom with like the countries that were geographically closer, Scotland, Ireland, and how hard those countries have fought for independence. And because they're geographically so close and they wanted it, the crown was like, nah, you can't have this, right? And now you've got somebody else that's wanting that same thing too, and they're going about it in an aggressive way. So it brings back all of these butthurt feelings from all of these other countries that have done it and the Americans and everything else. And they're like, no. So like you dig your heels in. It's almost like an instinctual thing, right? When it's like, you've got this thing and like you don't really want it, but you don't want to give it up, and someone goes, well, give me that thing, like I need it. And you're like, no. Well, no, give it to me. You're gonna start pushing back. Like it's just, that's human nature, right? And it gets even worse when you grow it out to like the, nationwide government level, especially when you have like a weird, at that time, like monarchy that's not really a monarchy because it's a weird monarchy democracy thing. And then you start getting into the whole like Triple H thing, not the wrestler, the economist. And yeah.
So what I gathered from all that info is the government's useless.
Yes.
British is a bunch
Also,
of
dick
British.
measuring contest, government useless.
Rhodesians win.
Most government's useless, but Ian Smith, I'd be okay with him running the government.
Yes.
Yeah.
A true patriot, as
Yeah.
Well, that, and like, it's not that people of certain skin colors couldn't vote. It's just that you had to meet certain criteria.
Yeah.
And things like that. So
Like,
it's,
you contribute to society and pay taxes. Okay, now you get to have a say.
One, I
Basically.
don't know that that's a terribly bad way to run a franchise to
Yeah, that's what I
be
mean.
able to vote.
I mean, I don't know why he gets ostracized for having such a view. I mean, it's pretty common sense, but I mean, in the clown world that we've lived in for quite some time now.
You gotta remember the 60s is the beginning of the Western Cultural Revolution too, right? That's
Revolution.
you mispronounced Marxist revolution. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you understand where I'm coming from with it. Is the Immigration
March
Act in
towards
1965 in America,
Progressivism. Yeah.
the Canadian Bill of Rights in 67. Like the 60s is a very turbulent time, and we're redefining a lot of things, and that's why I'm using the term revolution the way that I am. So we're changing the way that the game is played on a global scale.
Yeah. And these guys, like, they're fighting for their independence at the wrong time, especially when there is a perceived racial connotation to their struggle.
Yeah, like I feel like they're no different than us. It's just Canada and everything that came before them. There was less technology and there was less globalism in place, so it was a lot easier to be independent. It's like, well, there's a whole ocean between me and you, so you know what? We're gonna kind of respect you, but still go fuck yourself because we really don't have to do what you say.
And
You're way over there, and we're here.
And we were able to import more Europeans here much faster to have the relative population be mostly European. So when we asked for independence, it was easily granted, as opposed to having a minority of Europeans and a majority of, not Europeans.
I want to say in 1970, the white population of Rhodesia was like 300,000 people.
Yeah.
And I think the black population in Rhodesia in 1870 was 300,000 people. And by 1970, it was 6 million.
Yeah. Like, it is the majority of the population by a lot.
Maybe I have the number slightly off. And I know they're early in the book, chapter 1, maybe, or 2 is around the same point that they say if we would have just let the African tribes genocide one another, the Shona people would not exist, and therefore Robert Mugabe would not exist, and therefore this problem would be a slightly different set of problems. I don't think that Hans Wessels is quite right in that the problem would go away. I just think the problem would not be called Robert Mugabe. I think it would just have a different name. But we're in the course of 100 years, they've gone from 200 white settlers, 200 white pioneers to 300,000 people, and 300,000 Native Africans to 6 million Native Africans.
Your numbers seem right. They said it was 300,000 white population, which was 8% of the total population.
Yeah, so I'm going to be close on my numbers then. So I paid attention when I read the book, which is good news. But this is what I mean. So it's a very small number of white people running a country, like a fairly large country, mind you. Like Rhodesia is
Yeah.
not a small piece of Africa.
Yeah.
And the worst part is like this book is mostly based on 99% of the white population saying like, no, this is enough. Let's be our own country. And it's
Well, and I think this is another one of those things that's poorly understood. Is like,
yeah,
well, the white and black Africans in Rhodesia would have been treated differently. They weren't treated badly, and I think there's a misunderstanding, particularly with how American media is, because of the slavery issue in the United States, which has its whole own set of stuff that I don't want to get into tonight because
No, it's
we
not.
don't have the
No,
time
we're
to
not-
talk about that.
we're not getting
But
into that tonight.
I think that there's a very broad brush that African countries get painted with as a result of the like the Americanization of media.
Well, then you're also dealing with like the time in which like the Civil War and that whole thing happened versus like the 70s. Well, things may not have been perfect or great or whatever for certain segments of a population. It was different in the 70s than it was during like the Civil
The
War.
1870s, yeah.
Yeah, like
and
things have
that's
changed.
the-
We've progressed, and in many ways for the better since then. And views have, while they may not have progressed all the way to where we view one another as equals, they were not as bad as they were. So yes, I would say that there was
No, and
definitely
you see examples of that throughout the book. Is that there are frequently white Rhodesians that work with black African Rhodesians to accomplish something to make their country better, particularly in the tribal trust lands. So
Yeah.
you have white government employees that have black staffs for them going out and providing clean drinking water for people, which I would be hard pressed to find anybody that thinks that's a bad thing.
well, I guess Trudeau, because he hasn't been able to do that yet.
Well,
Not
but
for
ours are
blacks, but for
Indian.
natives.
It's different.
Yeah, totally different.
Bazinga.
Yeah. Yeah, like you had, the white missionaries that, were going out and,
Sure.
giving food and medical
But you
aid and
also
all
had,
the
like,
things. And
the vast majority of the BSAP, the British South Africa Police, the National Police Force in Rhodesia, and the vast majority of the police force was black Africans.
and I mean, they were black Africans or black Rhodesians that were in the Rhodesian military fighting for Rhodesian independence.
And I mean, Watt goes so far as to say at one part near the, well, it's not quite the end of the book, maybe about chapter 10 or so. He goes so far as to say that one of his big regrets with the military is that he thinks after having worked with the Renamo fighters in Mozambique that they should have made the SAS an integrated service like other parts of the military. He thinks that by having been only open to white Rhodesians, that they limited the availability of the number of qualified people to do the job.
Yeah.
Could you
even
imagine
that-
if the SAS numbers were tripled? How that would have went?
And I think the problem is though, like, they were dealing with a problem at the time that, like, if they had started to let other people in, they would have opened themselves up to having moles for the other side.
More moles maybe than they already had, because that's another problem.
Well, they had moles that were part of like the British and everything that were like.
We skipped over a lot. We skipped over a lot of the book. Operation Dingo is a thing. I'm not going to read it now because of where we are for time.
Yeah, just
Operation
read
Dingo.
if you haven't.
You should go and get a thing. You should read that. I absolutely did not put placeholders in for the Viscount shootings because I do not want to read those passages because I probably can't do it out loud. Because shooting down civilian airliners is reprehensible.
Yeah.
I don't care what color you are. You don't shoot down civilian airliners. That's not
probably
cool,
one of the
man.
saddest chapters I've ever listened to, read in
I
my
just had
entire
to
life.
stop it.
Yeah.
Had a couple of points during that.
Yeah, it was bad. It was very bad.
And of course, I mean, we all know how the book ends. Eventually, the country becomes Zimbabwe, and they capitulate to the British Empire, or I guess the British Crown. It's not the Empire anymore. Smith isn't even the prime minister at that point because it's become 79. It becomes Zimbabwe Rhodesia, and then it just becomes Zimbabwe.
But I mean, if you watch a bunch of documentaries and stuff like that about the nation, during the transition and after the transition, there are a lot of the the black population that like are worse off now, even though they have more say in how the country is governed, because now it's like a true democracy where like everybody gets a vote.
Yeah, and Marxists are running their country and voting to give themselves extra stuff while they're living
Yeah.
in the prime minister's house in Salisbury, while they can't figure out how to run the farms and feed themselves. While at one point, 50 years ago, this was the country that was producing the most amount of wheat in the entire continent. They now can't figure out how to feed themselves.
I remember watching a documentary, and it had a guy that worked in a library, and that was his job. Like during the whole thing, it was a black guy that worked in the library, and he made a living for his family doing this. And like, it was like in the middle of nowhere too. So it was like the government at the time felt that it was important that there was a library in this small town in the middle of nowhere, enough so that they paid this guy enough money to raise a family on it. Well, the minute that they got the sort of independence and everything and all that and switched the government, and now all of the things changed, that fell off the radar. This guy still runs the library. He doesn't get paid. So like there's no electricity, the place is falling apart, the books are rotting because of the humidity and everything else. But because this guy believes so much in it, and like it's an incredible story, he's still doing it. But like, he's broke. He's got no job. He's got nothing. So how is this guy any better off? He's not. The library is not being maintained. So the education isn't getting out to the people that would be lesser educated, because they don't have access to those things. They still don't have the money. They have less money now than they did back then in order to go to school. The only thing they had was a local library, which at least they could go and read a book if they wanted to. Now they barely even have that.
Well, that was another significant mark. Watt talks throughout the book about people that he's worked with, particularly, I'm going to call them indigenous or friendly forces, Renemo fighters, being like educated. And it wasn't Watt. Somebody jumped into Mozambique to meet one of the Renemo leaders and gave him a copy of Shakespeare, like a leather-bound copy of all the compiled works of William Shakespeare. And like, a literate African who spoke Portuguese and Russian, who
wants to read Shakespeare,
English,
like come on,
who was like super stoked to read some Shakespeare
in the jungle. That
was crazy to read. Just being like, it's this random guy, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna give him this because it's no use to me. I've got a leather-bound Shakespeare.
I'm a knuckle-dragging soldier that barely completed high school, and I managed to get into the special forces. And well, maybe this guy that was educated in Moscow from Mozambique will appreciate some quality Billy S.
I think that's what it was, right? It was that KGB agent, wasn't it? Or
Well,
that
it was
KGB guy?
Lucas something. He was the head of the Renemo company in Mozambique.
Just like, random. I'm like, what? Like,
because nothing says living it up in the jungle like a leather-bound complete works of William Shakespeare.
Falling out of control.
You joke, but I mean,
well, this is why
the classics. They're
this
classics.
This is why we need a camp with Batman. Like,
all right, but I want some of those bush babies for company, not for eating.
All right, which is also a kind of a funny story in the book where he's going off to war with baby animals tucked inside his shirt and weird shit like that. So the toughest guy, not just in Letterkenny, but the entire world possibly, is going off to war with weird little critters tucked in his shirt because he doesn't want other people to eat them.
Well, we should talk about the toughest guy in Letterkenny, because through the book, I get the impression that Darrell Watt was not particularly well liked, and he did somehow eventually get commissioned as an officer in the army, and he did
spend enough time, right?
Right, so he didn't make it very far, but he got promoted through. He went in as an enlisted soldier. He was a sergeant at some point, and I think between when he was a sergeant, it seems like he got promoted, and there's not a lot of detail in the book that explains how that happened. But he and his troops never received any other awards from his own government. And he put very few of his
Many.
own people up for awards.
Well, but what he did, like, yeah,
Well, he did, but they never
They
received
never
them, and that's
followed
the-
through. Yeah, they never
Yeah,
followed through on
so
them.
he-
That was the problem.
yeah. Even though they more than deserved them.
Well, and that's I really think that this is an overlooked group of people. Not just Watt, which I mean, Watt is the central figure in this book.
Yeah.
But the men that served in C Squadron, vastly overlooked through history.
Yeah.
Like, these are some really tough dudes doing some really amazing soldiering.
Yeah.
In some of the worst conditions possible.
Yeah, and to run down your, like, literally to chase people to death.
Yeah, when you
To
are
go
wait.
into another
Vastly
country and not have water for days
outnumbered.
at a time.
and undersupplied.
To wake up with a lion in your face, and then you somehow corner it, and it still doesn't eat you.
Yeah, you
Or
Or
shake
wake
that
up to a
off.
hyena dragging you in your sleeping bag out into the bush.
And you're
Well,
able to shake that off and then still go chase down some communists and kill them.
And still go to sleep that night.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Sleep like a
like you
baby.
got woken up to a lion in your face,
Yeah.
and well, it ran off. All right, well, let's go back to bed.
Yeah.
Like, man, I would have been out of there so fast. Oh,
Well, yeah.
I'll
And I
keep
mean,
it.
these guys weren't even like doing the whole, like, German soldier Shaka Cola stimulant thing to stay awake. Like, they're just like, yeah, we're gonna just take a nap in the middle of the day in the jungle because it's
Yeah.
too hot.
and hope for the best.
Yeah. They're literally. So for those of you that own firearms and you know about maintaining your firearms and you've got the little like cloth patches that you drag through to clean your gun and all that,
God.
they're so low on supplies that they have literally tied a string to a patch and tied that to like a belt loop, and it's dragging behind them as they walk through the jungle picking up moisture. And they would take that patch and squeeze whatever drop of moisture out of it they could into their mouth to get just a single drop of water. That's how undersupplied these guys were.
hmm
And in my opinion, they still there's no way they didn't win.
Yeah.
Right? Like
These guys won.
almost,
The only
Yeah.
reason they lost is because of a political solution.
Because the politicians, and Wessel says that towards the end of the book, is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Daryl Watt and C Squadron won every battle they were in.
Yeah.
And Watt says that his biggest disappointment of the entire war was losing one soldier. So in 12 years of almost like
Plus
12
lose one.
continuous years of sustained combat operations against an enemy thousands of times larger than him,
Yeah.
he lost one trooper.
backed by countries thousands of times larger than them, Russia and China.
And I mean,
Russia and
like,
China, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
that's some serious leadership.
Insane.
Like, that's,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's honestly unheard of. And like I said, that's why I think this book stands out so much in my mind. Is like there's I can't think of any other examples of such heroism and leadership in any modern
Yeah, it's
situation
unreal.
whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you really like this, you really got to read the SAS in Rhodesia, We Dared to Win, because it's kind of like a follow-up book to this where it takes some of the same stuff but from different points of view, and some
It's
of
like
it's
an
like it's still
expansion pack.
it still talks about like Daryl Watt and Andre Sheepers and some of like the core group of people, but the last couple of chapters or the last chapter in that book,
Oh fuck!
I haven't
is-
listened to it yet.
it-
Don't ruin it.
I won't, but
Halfway
like
through.
it's almost heartbreaking because it's like it's the like,
It's the history of Zimbabwe, basically.
but like
So you're not really
Not
spoiling
missing it, yeah,
anything.
spoiling anything. We know.
no, but like they really get into it, and like he goes in about, he's like,
Actual thoughts.
we won, Like we won and we did everything we could to win, and it's the political solution that fucked us. And like this is all of the bad stuff that happened to Zimbabwe the minute that it became Zimbabwe. And it basically, all the people that were fighting for this, like it vindicated us, right? Like we were called the bad guys throughout this entire thing, and all of the things that we fought for and all of this. And now you look back on it and all of like the garbage things that like Mugabe did and all that, and like got in trouble for, doing this and that and everything else. They're like, this vindicated us. This proves that we were right. We're still screwed, but at least we know that we were right. And like,
we were the righteous.
We can die happy knowing that at least what we did was the right thing to do. Even if we ultimately failed, which the only reason they failed is because
again, they
political solution
never personally failed.
And they're still looked down upon as, the same as they were when they were doing this.
Well, when the Asians in Western Canada sell Rhodesian camo stuff and are called white supremacists, you know that it's still looked down upon.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
By who? It's honestly it's by people that have no idea about what they're talking about, other than like a few CNN headlines that they may have saw throughout the the early 80s or something like that. They have no.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing when you hear someone like that talks about the Civil War and about it was purely about racism. Was there a racist component to it? Potentially, yeah. There was some undertones there, and it had some things to do with some of that stuff. But was it exclusively about that? No, it was a much more complicated struggle that usually goes back to finances, because everything is about money and control.
But it's so much easier to just talk about the race card in that involvement. And, if we just, that's the easy go-to, right?
It's like, the woke argument, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and if we go back to when we talked about that story on the podcast, I don't know, a couple of years ago, we talked about a company that was in Canada, Fire Force Ventures, and this was a company that was selling military surplus stuff and reproduction Rhodesian and other equipment that has now moved to the U.S. And these were Canadian Forces reservists that were running a company in Alberta. And I mean, I was aware of Rhodesia before that, but I wasn't aware, like I didn't know the details and I hadn't done the research because this isn't the stuff that they cover in like high school history class, right?
Yeah.
No,
so,
because
I knew Rhodesia had become Zimbabwe. I knew
that's about
that Zimbabwe was run by like communists. Like I knew it was in Africa, but I didn't know who Ian Douglas Smith was. I didn't know that they were like a Commonwealth country that declared UDI and became their own, because this isn't stuff that was taught to us.
If anything, you'd heard that like Mugabe was the president.
Right. And that was what I knew, was that Mugabe was a president. And from another friend of ours, I knew that like I shouldn't like him because he's not got the same brand of politics that I have. But I didn't really know much else. And that was a couple of years ago while we were doing this podcast. And since then, I've read some books and I've watched some documentaries, and man, these guys were up against the entire world.
Literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they almost had a friend in South Africa. Almost.
Like a half a friend.
For a very short period of time.
But wow, okay, so they had friendly relations with the Portuguese for a very, very the beginning of UDI,
maybe 5 years ish.
And they had some like on and off with the South Africans.
They put their tail between their legs and they left.
Well, and I mean, would you not go, like, if you were running a colony half a world away, would you not fuck off back to where you came from if the communists were trying to take it and killing all your troops?
Ian Smith wouldn't. Ian Smith wouldn't.
Answer,
Ian Smith is in Portuguese.
Yeah, to answer Hal in the comments there, why didn't you learn about Rhodesia in high school?
Communism.
It doesn't fit the narrative, right? Like,
no. You're not supposed to rise up against your masters, right?
Like, well, that was the thing. All I knew about it was Robert Mugabe was a guy I wasn't supposed to like because he has a different brand of politics than I have. And the only thing I knew about that prior was that like there was a bunch of racists in Africa that were like
Yeah.
oppressing the blacks, and that
But
was why.
like to admit that Zimbabwe is a failure is to admit that the Rhodesians were right, and we couldn't do that because that's racist. So we're going to take Mugabe and all of the corrupt things that he did and ignore that. And like, if you're even slightly right leaning, you're going to be basically told that, yeah, you shouldn't listen to this guy and he's an idiot and his politics won't agree with yours, so you shouldn't like him. But that's all you're going to be told. And only if you're in a very small circle of people where you feel free enough to say that.
Well, that's
and
what I
they
mean,
also
like,
they also don't want you to take notes, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean,
well, that's I
it's
really
the
I get
projection, right?
the
Well, and
TPPs from this. Like, if you can take a bunch of stuff from this book about how to fight an insurgency and how to win a bush war and what it takes to
Yeah, with a couple of old
overthrow-
helicopters. Yeah.
well, but like a couple of helicopters versus like brand new
Yeah.
peak technology in its day, the best that 1978 has to offer, anti-aircraft missiles, and you've got Alouette 3s that were built in the 40s,
Well, and
maybe
that's
the early
that's
50s.
partly why they had to go into Mozambique and ruin the infrastructure, because at one point those guys had a much more sophisticated radio system that they couldn't crack and hear the communication, so they had to blow that shit up, so that they had to revert back to their older one so that the guys in Salisbury could overhear it and crack their codes.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah,
Re-
but you
read
didn't
more of
hear
these
about
books.
it.
What
You'll
what's
hear
the
about all
other-
the other stuff like the Civil War and like World War II and all these other things, because like either there wasn't enough information that's accurately recorded at the time so that they could twist the thing around to make it sound like however it was, or the prevailing story of the time meets the narrative of today's time, and it's okay to still tell that story with less tweaking than about something that happened a long time ago. But Rhodesia was too recent that like if people really start digging into it, there's still too much information that was well recorded. You just have to dig deeper because it's suppressed.
So
Well, there.
on that topic, follow-up books. This was Handful of Hardened Men, Hans Wessels. There's another Hans Wessels book. I think somebody mentioned it a minute ago. What was that one?
We
The
dared to
SAS
win.
in Rhodesia, we
win,
dared
yeah.
to win.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Um,
partly written by him and written by someone else, so it's not entirely written by him.
It covers the same people in the same things, but with a slightly different perspective. But really, really good follow up to
It's more
this
like
book.
It's more like firsthand accounts of like the guys that were in the in the units.
Yeah, it's less about Daryl and more about the other people. Not that
Yeah,
the other
exactly.
people aren't mentioned in the other books and their accounts aren't recorded. It's just a more
You get more background. You get
Yeah.
more like, so this is what I did before I got to the SAS, and then these are my firsthand accounts of my ass kickery, in
Yeah.
battles.
highly recommend.
Mhm.
If anything, the narrator on this book is better than the narrator on the Handful of Hard Men, because it's got a guy with like a thick British accent.
That sounds
The
like
whole
James
time,
Bond.
Yeah.
I felt that I was being told someone's memoirs while sitting in a study in front of a fireplace.
Yeah,
you know,
he's in one of
sipping
those,
on
like,
scotch
high-
and
high leatherback chairs with like a pipe and like a
Fucking
cognac or a scotch or something, and he's just like with the pipe and
And then at the end of it, it was who was it? It was what's that game? Clue. It was
Professor Plum in the study
yeah,
with
Professor Plum. It was Professor Plum in the library with this.
But yeah, the last chapter in the SAS in Rhodesia is kind of heartbreaking. But you feel good about it, but in like a bad way, or you feel bad about it, but in a good way. But you much like they probably did when they heard it and read it and saw it in print, that like you feel a little bit vindicated for them.
Yeah, like you feel good that pretty much they all walked away.
They were proven right because of the failure that Zimbabwe is.
Yeah.
They've restarted the currency, 2 or 3 times before they finally jumped on being backed by the USD. It's like you can buy like $1 trillion note.
Yeah.
And it's like $3 or something like that.
If you ain't into that USD.
Like
which I'm not. There's a couple of other books that I'm going to mention that are not Hans Wessel's. Ian Smith's biography, Bitter Harvest.
It has another name as well, The Great Betrayal.
Uh,
Depending on,
So he actually has two different biographies,
aren't they the same one but released at different times?
released a different time with different content.
Ah. Well,
So
there you go.
the Great Betrayal and also A Bitter Harvest. Three Sips of Gin, which is the Celius Scouts book. The Celius Scouts, actually, they're mentioned in Full of Hard Men. They're Ron Reed Daly's outfit. They're another, well, I'll say tier 1. They're another special forces group.
Yeah, it's like the
in Rhodesia.
RLI, the SAS, and the Celius Scouts are kind of the three groups that were really fucking shit up.
When the RLI are effectively line infantry, they're not particularly like special forces, although they do have commando elements, which
Yeah.
I guess kind of. There was another book, Bush War Operator by A.J. Ballum. So he was in the RLI and the Celius Scouts, and that's another memoir type book. So
And it seems that some of these guys kind of jumped back and forth between those three
well,
organizations.
I think a lot of that had to do with the SAS and the Celius Scouts both drew experienced infantrymen from
Yeah.
the RLI.
Because
Because
Watt
the
was in
Celius
the
Scouts-
RLI and then went to the SAS.
Well, and
if
that's
I
the thing,
recall.
is the SAS and the Celius Scouts are both like special forces, tier 1.
Yeah, so they're
you
pulling
don't
from-
get just pulled off the street to go and do that, right? You're not just a
No,
kid out
it's
of
not
high
the
school going to
Canadian
the
military.
SAS.
Yeah.
So the RLI being the premier Rhodesian infantry regiment, that's where all the top recruits are being drawn from for their special forces
Yeah.
programs. But the RLI also has commando companies, so they're baby SF kind of thing going on, that they're doing
Yeah.
more than just line infantry stuff, but they're
Yeah,
not
they're doing 3 combat drops a day.
right. So you do get the commando course, and you do get that kind of stuff. There was a lot of
Oh,
contention
yes.
between the SAS and the Celius Scouts, and I think a lot of that had to do with Ron Reed Daly, the CO of Celius Scouts. Like, Watt almost left SAS because he didn't get along with his chain of command, and he didn't. But his immediate superior asked him to stay on, and he had a good relationship with that guy, and that's probably the only reason why he stayed in the SAS. There was lots of other SAS operators that went across to the Scouts, and they did their own whole cool set of stuff. They weren't necessarily a competing
But
outfit.
it sounds like anyone that really crossed over one way or the other, while they did some cool stuff and maybe eventually were accepted, that took a while.
I think it did, and you get that in part of a combat outfit, right? You get that esprit de corps because nothing brings
we're
people
better
together
than that
being
guy.
shot
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
Well,
But yeah, like
one,
it's like the Army Navy game, right? Like you're all on the same team until you're against one another, and then it's like our side is better than your side.
well,
same
one
kind
guy
of
they
deal.
talked about it in the We Dare to Win. One guy was in the SAS, switched over to the Celius Scouts, then decided to come back to the SAS, and had to do selection all over again.
All over again, yeah.
Was that Sheppers? I remember reading
Sheepers,
that.
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, whatever. It's like no big.
Yeah, you did it. Like
whatever.
No biggie.
NBD,
3 weeks of pure
crushed
torture.
it.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Fuck that shit.
yeah,
Hard as
but
fuck.
like
And I
that's
think he said
that's- fair is
I
fair.
think he even
Oh,
said
and
the
they
sec-
pushed him harder too on the second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you want back in? You're gonna have to prove it. You want back in, boy.
Yeah,
But standards are important.
standards are important.
And people who want to
so-
come back are
Yeah.
scolded even
Ju-
harder.
And just because you could hack it a year ago doesn't mean you could hack it now.
Yeah. Why do you want to come back so badly?
I
Right?
would
What-
like, if
what-
anybody happens to come across it, if it does exist, I would very much like to find a biography or an autobiography of Ron Reed Daly, the CO at Scouts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is he just seemed, from all of the, he's mentioned in a lot of stuff. I would very much like a firsthand account of him.
And you know what? As weird as it might sound, I would love to have a biography of Flowers, just to see like an autobiography
I would
would
like
be
to
even
hear
better,
things from his perspective,
just to see
and
like
the
why
same
he
thing with
did what he
General
did.
Wells.
Yeah.
Or Walls, General Walls.
Why did you do what you did? Like,
Well, I don't know if we'll find that for Flower, because
No.
I firmly believe that Ken Flower was a British agent the entire time.
yeah, but at least then if he's like, I did it for Queen and Country, you're like, okay, I can get that. I don't like it, but I can understand
Great argument. Please face the wall.
that. Yeah. But at
Let's
least
go
he's
for a
like,
helicopter ride.
yeah. But at least if he could say that and honestly say that, then it's like, I can respect your stick to itiveness, right? Like you had a loyalty and you stuck to your loyalty, which in this day and age is few and far between, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
But you could still stand against the wall, at least respect you when I
That's
shoot
right.
you in the face. Yeah.
Yeah, I can respect you. I don't have to agree with you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Anybody got anything else that we overlooked aside from just like wanting to
Shock
read
and
the
awe.
entire book again?
Yeah.
No, seriously though, if you're on the fence and if you're listening to this show and you're on the fence and you still haven't decided to read it, make good life choices. Read this book. Read the other book. You will not regret it.
It's the best one. It's my favorite one that we've done so far, honestly. Over a year
I
of book reviews.
actually-
It's
The first time I started reading through this book, I was actually really worried about it because of the way it's formatted, because it's laid out in a very strange way. Because it's sort of interview and it's sort of biographical and it's sort of historical.
Flips back and
And
forth
it flips
and it's
around a little bit. And I was a little bit worried going into it because I got to the end of the chapter
Yeah.
1 and I was like, I don't like this style, but man, did it ever grow on me by the time I got to the end? Because it's like,
it
oh
works.
yeah,
It
definitely,
works.
definitely stick with it. The first
Yeah.
couple of chapters is kind of
It is a little strange how it
Yeah.
flips kind of from like
but
first
then
person
once it gets
account
going though,
to
once it starts getting into some nitty gritty and some battles, like you're there and you're all the way
oh
in.
man,
Yeah,
by
you're-
the time
you're
they get
in
to
the book.
Operation Dingo, I'm like, yeah, shoot those fucking terrorists.
yeah,
10,000 to 200.
Yeah.
Let's fucking do it.
yeah. Yeah, if you're not into the weird formatting of books, read Discipline Equals Freedom first, then come into
Yeah.
this one.
It is laid out in a strange way because it does flip back and forth between being like historical, like academic style, like this is a thing that
to
happened,
first
these are some-
person to like third person to
and interviews and firsthand accounts and it
but it
flips
works.
around a
It
little
works
bit.
for this. The SAS in Rhodesia is basically in the exact same format. But in both of those books, you don't like you notice it first, but after that, like once it starts getting good, which is almost immediately, you don't even notice.
Yeah, as soon as they start shooting terrorists, I'm
Yeah.
sold.
I just tried to stop paying attention to the timeline when I was listening to it.
Yeah.
Because
enjoy the
I
story.
didn't really know much history about this up until the last little bit.
Agreed.
And
It's the most I've learned about it too. It's
And
just enjoy the stories as they come.
Well, I
yeah,
think
trying to
enjoy
keep
the story
track
for
of like
sure.
what happened in chronological
No,
order was way
I-
too much.
It is laid out chronologically, which is, I think, nice from an academic perspective. But I mean, I don't try to grasp all the dates you first go through unless
No.
you already know the history of what was going on in Africa
Yeah,
and
just-
in world
it's
politics
really
in the
not necessary.
1970s.
Take in the big picture.
Because you don't need to know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's not necessary.
Well, and I think, take in the big picture, but also look at the TPPs. Make some notes. It's
Yeah,
good to know how to set a
I'll-
J ambush.
Yeah, I'll lend you a bunch.
Good to
don't
know
worry.
how to do some of that
The
stuff.
one thing that and maybe
you want to
this
be on
might
our
be
fire team, it's
this
crucial.
might be the comment that gets us kicked off of the YouTubes, but like the one thing that I found strange about this book, and it's maybe because I watched too many Vietnam movies, was their use of the word gook. I
Yeah.
always thought that was a racial slur about a particular group of people, the Vietnamese. However, they're using it to describe people in Africa. So it confused me a little bit at first.
Yeah, me too.
Mhm.
So I guess it's not actually a racial slur, and it's just a slur against communists. Is my take on this now. Maybe I'm wrong.
Communists in the bush, I would think. I would take it one step further.
But maybe that's my take on it now, and that it's no longer a slur against people of a particular ethnic origin, but a slur against people of a particular political leaning.
Filthy communists.
Yeah.
Liberal?
I agree.
Yeah, same thing. Same, but different. But yeah, that threw me for a loop at the beginning. I was like, wait, what? Why is he using this word? This is weird.
Yeah.
This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, right. Because the only time you've ever heard that term is when you've watched the Vietnam era.
Yeah, like
war
when
movie.
you're watching Apocalypse Now or what is it, Deer Hunter or something like that, you hear it like all the time.
No.
Or if you're in the States and down at the VFA and you're having drinks with some guy that's been there and done that. But like other than that, you never hear that word.
No, you never do.
Or except for maybe in like Gran Torino with what's his face, Clint Eastwood, but like that's a different story. Yeah, that's a different story. Yeah.
Okay, I
that was
actually
a good
looked it up on Wikipedia. It actually, in modern U.S. usage, gook refers particularly to communist soldiers. That was mainly during the Vietnam War, but like that's what it's evolved to.
Well, there
right
you
now.
go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
All right.
There you go.
From now on, we're taking that word back and we're just calling commies gooks.
It is not anything to do with anyone's ethnicity. It is purely about their
as long as
political
it doesn't
leanings.
violate what's the new bill C-36?
36.
C10
Yeah.
and 36.
Oh, yeah, but that
You
doesn't
So as
guys
long
happen
as I'm
yet.
not facing a $70,000 fine and a year
Yeah,
in prison,
you might be 10 years from now when they finally find this video, though, even though it was recorded before the law came into effect.
Yeah.
well, from now on, we're calling commies gooks.
Not a racial thing.
Not a
political
racial thing.
Just
Yeah.
filthy
Political.
communists. There's
Yeah.
just nothing racial
Well,
about it.
I like filthy. Well, I was gonna say it's not true. We can call them filthy communists. I accept that language.
Yeah, they
Absolutely.
are not people. It's okay.
Yeah, no. They deserve helicopter rides, but one way.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
entitled
it's the
to
best
my
kind.
opinion. You're entitled to your opinion. But I
And
should,
also
you
a
shouldn't yell at
7.62
me.
round.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting to that.
Only one side is right, and I mean
Yeah,
we're all
or
sitting right here.
5.7 by 28, 9mm, 223, 308, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, Gavin's not
Yeah.
picky. All right, so I think next month the plan is to revisit our favorite gay Nazi. We're going back to Jack Donovan.
Yeah.
I think next month we're going to do Becoming a Barbarian.
Yeah. I guess this book marks like a complete year and a month of doing book club, which you guys seem to all, you guys being the listeners, not the people on the panel. We really like it because it's something to talk about that's not politics and like weird
I don't think-
blackpilling.
I don't
Not
think
politics,
maybe one,
but
but I
it
don't think I missed a
is-
single book
Yeah,
club
yeah.
this year.
But like it's fun to talk about something that's like relates to current events, but also like evergreen content because current events are always relevant when it's like this. But it's less blackpilling sometimes. But yeah, starting it all off again. Our favorite gay Nazi, his second book. Well, I guess his third book technically, but we don't need to read the first one.
We're not reading the first one. Not
Yeah.
subjecting anyone to that. So next month it'll be Becoming a Barbarian, Jack Donovan. We're also on Discord if you want to hang out and talk smack or tell me which books you've read recently. You can do that on our Discord channel.
We can compare book
Yeah.
lists.
Yeah, well, we do have the book list, and people have sent in
us
suggestions
your
for
hot
book
take.
club. So
Read
wanna-
Handful of Hard Men and give us your hot take. Tell us
Yeah.
why it's your favorite book ever.
I mean, I don't know if it was my favorite book ever, but I mean, like top
It's-
5 for
Like
sure.
I said, it's up
Yeah.
there. It is up there. I will talk about it forever.
I'm really
It is a
enjoying
really
this,
good
man. I'm
book.
not gonna lie, because like this has encouraged me to read more, and I'm at 20 books so far finished this year. I'm well past my goal for the year.
Man, I just want to read some more books about these guys.
Yeah, I know. This is
Yeah.
gonna like
Well, that's what I said. We're not even doing book club on the second book for
Well,
Dare to
my-
Win.
my-
but I'm
my
absolutely
goal-
all up in that.
my goal for the year was 24 books, so like 2 books a month, right? Like, which is not like crazy.
Mhm.
I'm almost finished my 21st book.
And it's still June.
Yeah, well,
I'm smashing that goal. I am
I
the
read-
Rhodesian SAS, and my reading goal is Sandla, and I am just like,
Unrelenting.
Hammering it.
yeah,
You're just
I don't know,
balls deep right in it.
yeah. Oh yeah.
I read Handful twice. I might read it a third time yet because it is just really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should go around if I don't know if you guys don't really social media. I guess Dave and Gavin, if you want to plug your
Yeah,
your
you can
stuff.
you can find me on the IG's Urbex GTA, or well, I won't be at the one in that's coming up, the service pistol match, but I'll be at the August action shooting, not IDPA match.
Can't
come out
say
and
IDPA cease and
No,
desist happened.
It's not IDPA. It's not the
Uh-huh.
same thing. It's not IDPA. But come out and shoot the things if you have some sort of a pistol and or holster qualification. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll be there. Do the thing. Do hard things with your friends.
Wear short
A
shorts.
handful.
It's a good
Yeah.
time.
Do it while your hands are full.
Find me at IG at Diesel6223, and you'll find me at my second home this summer up at Milken. I'm either running matches or shooting matches up there, and there's still some open spots on some of the OSA matches. So come on up and shoot some long range stuff with me. It's a good time.
If you've listened to us ramble along this long, you deserve a discount code. RagnarOkTactical.ca. Use the discount code Patriot at checkout. Save yourself some money. $10 flat rate shipping. I'm working on t-shirts and hats. I've heard the orders. I understand. I talked to Tim. We're making t-shirts happen. It's a bit of a process, but we're working on it. If you want to send us feedback or tell us why we're racist for reading about guys in brushstroke, you can send your hate mail to me. Feedback at CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. Show me where on the map the country that doesn't exist anymore offended you. Duh.
Well said. Well said.
I've been going back and forth a little bit on this for the last little bit, but I think I'm going to read the very end of the book. This is an address from Graham Wilson. He was one of the officers at one SAS at the end of the war. We will leave here not only in sorrow, but filled with pride, dignity, and honor in ourselves and in one SAS. We have much to be grateful for. I'm eternally grateful to those men who served with the unit before we did, to those amongst us who have lost loved ones, to those who were wounded, to those friends, and there are many of them, who stood by us, to the wives and families who stood behind us, to those who have fought with such courage beside us, and especially to those who gave their lives for Rhodesia and the unit. We have not let them down, and we will not forget them. I know that in the years to come, we can with the greatest pride say, I served with the Rhodesian SAS. May God bless you, and thank God we did our duty.
Ian Smith did nothing wrong.
Ian Smith didn't do anything wrong.
Well, except for maybe trust flowers, but
Yeah, well.